At WKRG Plus, we make weather easy to understand. This is WeatherWise.
Hello everyone, I'm Chief Meteorologist Ed Bloodsworth with WKRG News 5, and welcome to another edition of WeatherWise, your one-stop shop for weather knowledge on the Gulf Coast. And thanks for watching WeatherWise here on the WKRG Plus app. On this edition of WeatherWise, we are talking about something that's been in the news, unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons, the next weather phenomenon on our list, and we are talking about flooding. We've had a lot of instances of flash flooding, and a lot of it proving deadly, even significantly so. Of course, all those headlines coming in out of Texas. So what we're going to do is a deep dive into flooding, the types of flooding, and some of the stats to go along with it. In fact, that's where we're going to begin now. I want to show you some weather stats from 2024. So this is last year. So you're going to see a lot of bar graphs on here, and every one of those collections of bars indicate weather fatalities from select weather phenomenon. So the red bars represent the 2024 fatalities from flooding, lightning, tornadoes, hurricanes, heat, extreme cold and winter events, as well as wind and rip currents. Now the blue bars represent the 10-year average for those weather hazards as well, and the yellow bars represent the 30-year average of fatalities for each weather hazard. Now, as we mentioned on a previous episode of WeatherWise, that heat was the number one weather-related killer in the U.S. each and every year, accounts for more fatalities than most of the other weather hazards combined. But second on the list is flash flooding, and flooding in itself is the number one severe weather-related killer in the U.S. And you can see it accounted for in 2024, just under 90 fatalities, and over that 10-year period, over 140 people were killed as a result of water rises and flooding. Here's a look at the flooding fatalities and river flood fatalities. This is from the National Weather Service. You go back from 2005 to 2024. Now, some of these stats are going to be a little bit skewed because you'll notice 2005, it does not account for the total number of fatalities from Hurricane Katrina. So that is something to keep in mind, that in terms of storm surge related of flooding, that is not included in these numbers. That's something to note. But you'll note on some years when we typically have fewer high impact flood events, you of course have fewer fatalities as a result. But on certain years, you get significant spikes. For instance, 2015 was a year where we had significant fatalities out of the Carolinas. If you remember, a very complex pattern which involved a very strong hurricane in the Bahamas, Hurricane Joaquin, and a big slingshot of moisture going into the Carolinas. Well, of course, we know flooding can happen in a lot of different ways. Now, one of the ways that we've been noticing, and of course, one of the more recent terrible ways, look at this video, it should become very apparent where this is. Kerrville, Texas, of course, go back to the Independence Day flash flood event along the Guadalupe River. A tremendous flood event occurred with very slow-moving storms producing upwards of 10 inches of rain, and due to the terrain and the kind of soil that this was moving on top of, it led to a massive flood event along the Guadalupe River. You saw waters rising over 20 feet in some cases in just a matter of an hour or two. And of course, you know what that led to, at least 130 fatalities. And of course, it's seeing a lot of mentioning of the Camp Mystic and the young girls that were unfortunately killed as a result of this flash flooding. And we saw numerous water rescues during the July 4th event over the Lone Star State. Take a look at this. This is a look at some videos sent out by the San Angelo Police Department that I found pretty remarkable. There was a drone up in the air as water rescues were ongoing. So you see the Fort Worth PD, folks from that department, helping that stranded motorist in that minivan, and then there's another person sitting on top of a pickup truck there. Those areas are marked. Another example of a water rescue that took place in the San Angelo area. This was taken, as you can see, the law enforcement personnel moving and walking on a roof there, and there is someone grasping onto the base of that tree. And again, just imagine holding on to something like that for such a long period of time. I don't think anyone of us will ever forget the images there coming out of the Lone Star State back on July 4th. Now, closer to home across the Gulf Coast, we've had our fair share of high-impact rain events in 2025. This is video from early April, when we had several instances of slow-moving storms and training thunderstorms that helped to produce absolutely massive rainfall amounts. We had an instance where we had over 10 inches of rain over portions of Baldwin County, upwards of 13 inches of rain in some isolated spots, and a widespread 7 to 10 inches of rain on this day on April 6th in Mobile County. That led to significant flooding in a lot of our flood-prone areas, Broad Street areas of downtown. And in this instance, there were a lot of the law enforcement personnel telling people who were trying to drive through the water, saying, look, if your car stalls out, then don't expect us to hurry up and come get your car. They were trying to block off traffic at this time. And that takes us to another thing that we'll talk about in terms of flooding safety in this latest episode of Weather Wise. A lot of different ways that you can get flash flooding. You can get significant flash flooding, river flooding. We just mentioned those. Tropical systems will bring astronomical amounts of rain, of course, harken back to 2017 and Hurricane Harvey in the Lone Star State. Now, you can also get flash flooding from burn scars, areas that have had significant wildfire activity. When it rains, a lot of that can turn into debris flows, which can churn down into some of the valleys. You can get significant ice jams, frozen rivers and lakes. When the ice starts to crack up, that can actually cause blockages along the rivers, leading to flash flooding. Snow melt, dry wash, and dam breaks and levee failures can also result in significant flash flooding. So a lot of different ways to get dangerous water rises. Let's talk about flash flooding, and specifically urban flash flooding. So this is one of the more common types of flash flooding. This is when you get significant rainfall over a relatively urbanized area, and it is up to the stormwater systems to drain all that water out. Well, with the kind of rainfall that we can receive, a lot of those stormwater systems just cannot handle that much rain in a short period of time. So storm drains tend to overflow, and you get flooding in neighborhoods along streets. And unfortunately, in some of the more extreme cases, you can get flooding entering buildings, homes, and businesses. The other type of flash flooding that you get is rural flooding, where you get significant rainfall. Again, the same processes in place here, but that can also cause flash floods into the valleys and also into these local streams and river basins, and that can cause short-term rises in water, like we saw on the Guadalupe in Texas on July 4th, but this can also cause longer-term flooding as well over a selected area where you get waters or rivers that are running above average for an extended period of time. Now, water is powerful. We mention this all the time. It only takes 6 inches of moving water to sweep a person off their feet. Hard to believe. It takes only a foot of water to actually float a car or an SUV, and larger vehicles about 18 inches of water. So we mention the old saying, turn around, don't drown. You cannot accurately gauge just from viewing water in front of you as you're in the car just how deep it is. So whenever you see a flooded road, you need to turn around. Now, watch versus warning. When you have a flash flood watch, that means conditions are in place where we could get flooding. So at this point, you need to prepare for rising water. When that flash flood warning is issued, that means it's happening, and action must be taken to prevent any significant loss of life or property. So at that point, you get the alerts that it's time to move to higher ground in the cases of a flash flood warning. Now, something that the Weather Service did several years ago to include impact-based warnings. So we've noticed this with severe thunderstorm alerts, tornado alerts, that there would be a tag attached to these warnings when they are issued, which would tell you the severity of the flash flood threat. In this case, you get a base flash flood warning. That means waters is imminent and flash flooding is occurring, and you may get some water inundation into homes and businesses. Now, there are two other levels of flash flood warnings. A considerable flash flood warning means that there is now a more significant threat to life and property, that the waters are rising in a more significant fashion. The highest level of alert is the flash flood emergency. And we've had instances of this on the Gulf Coast. We saw plenty of that over Texas back in July. And at this point, this is catastrophic flooding. That is a rare emergency situation. And at this point, water rescues are likely and evacuations need to be taken at that time. So a lot of different ways that flash flooding can occur, in a lot of different instances where you get the ponding of the water on the roads, all the way up to those major catastrophic events like we saw in Texas in July of 2025. Now, let's talk a little bit about ways that you can prepare for flash flooding. One thing I do want to mention, that when a considerable or catastrophic emergency in terms of flash flooding is issued, you will get a wireless alert on your phone that will activate the wireless emergency alert system. A base flash flood warning will not activate that system. So, things you should do to prepare for flooding. Well, first of all, you need to know if you live in a flood area. Do I live in a flood plain? That is very important to know in the cases of flooding. You also want to make sure you check with your insurance coverage. Make sure that you are fully covered if you live in an area that is susceptible to significant flood damage. Clearing nearby storm drains. This tends to lead to a lot of issues in neighborhoods where your drain is blocked up with leaves or debris, something along those lines, and flooding can occur in a much quicker way. And also, electronic devices should be charged in the event of flash flooding. So in the case you are impacted by it, you are able to contact emergency services. Always a good thing to have. And of course, we always encourage you to have multiple ways to receive those life-threatening weather alerts, whether it's for severe winds, tornadoes, or in the case of flash flooding, especially those overnight events, they can be quite significant. You should always make sure you are ready to take action and know where you would go in the event of a significant flash flood event. Well, that's going to do it for this latest edition of WeatherWise. We thank you for joining us. Remember, you can look at additional episodes of WeatherWise here on the WKRG Plus app, and make sure you send us your ideas for our next WeatherWise segment. What do you want to learn about? What phenomenon have you seen that you want answers to? Well, that is the purpose of WeatherWise here. From all of us at WKRG News 5 and the News 5 First Alert Storm Team, thank you for joining us, and make sure you stay weather-wise.